Okay, folks, good evening, and good evening to anyone who's listening online. It's 6:30 and we'll get cracking to get it started. On behalf of SciWEM's Republic of Ireland branch, Engineers Ireland Civil Division and the Water and Environmental Society, I'd like to welcome you all here tonight, and especially welcome Tracey Williamson from Arup, who's our presenter tonight. She's going to present on historic dam failures and recent incidents. I don't think there's many of us in the sort of water and environmental engineering and science community that aren't fascinated with dams and probably had secret wishes to be dam engineers or scientists when they were in college, but very few are chosen, of course. And Tracy here tonight, she is, as well as being a chartered engineer and a fellow of the Institution of Civil Engineers, she's the incoming chair of the British Dam Society. She's Associate Director of Arup, apologies, Arup. And before that, she was with Welsh Water, where she headed a team of operational staff looking after 135 dams in Wales, which are covered under the Reservoirs Act. And she's a supervising engineer under the Act. So tonight she's going to talk about historic dam failures and recent incidents. And I think we've been probably very lucky in Ireland and the UK. There's been very few dam failures and probably more incidents that we don't know about. But certainly when there are incidents, it's one of the few sort of things in our field that's guaranteed to make the news. And we saw that in the States. It probably chilled any of us to see how quickly the dam in California began to fail. And Tracy's going to talk about that tonight. So if you give her a round of applause and welcome her, and we look forward to it.
Thank you very much, Rory, for your introduction, and good evening, everyone. So the topic of my lecture this evening is a little bit shocking, potentially not such a positive subject to talk about. So I thought I'd start off. I'm going to just do a few slides on dams in all their beauty, just start off on a positive note. And then I'll get into the nitty-gritty of the lecture, which is all about the hazards, dam failures, and the near misses around the world and in the UK. And the second half of my lecture will be on two case studies. One is on a spillway failure that I was involved in when I was at Washwater, and I'll contrast that one to the recent dam spillway failure in the United States of America, which you may have or may not have heard about, in Oroville Dam. So here, as I said, some of the beautiful dams. The dams that you see on a sunny day, and when you see these sort of dams and you're inspecting them as a dam engineer, it makes you realise why you do the job, and it certainly is a job that I enjoy on a day like this. This is a dam in Wales that we've recently worked on and stabilised the tower, and a couple of dams in the Elan Valley. I personally think that these are the most beautiful dams in the world. I may be biased, these are in the Welsh mountains, but they are certainly spectacular and beautiful dams. So let's get into the less positive side of dams. So dams by their very nature are hazardous, they pose a threat. There are many, many ways that that a dam may fail, or certainly start the process towards failure. And some of the failure modes that are the most prevalent are overtopping, internal erosion, and instability. Certainly in the UK, overtopping and internal erosion probably account for about a third each of the dam failures in the UK. And you can see from my diagrams here the different ways that the failures can occur. So from overtopping, that may result in erosion of the upstream face, and that can be focused and concentrated around things like trees and where there's been erosion caused by animals that are burrowing into the dam. And with internal erosion, that's normally caused by what we call hydraulic fracture, and when the reservoir level is quite high, this puts additional pressures on the dam, and your core may crack if the velocities in the seepage become too high, and that starts erosion. With instability, there's many ways that instability can slope may fail. One of those that's shown on the diagram here is rapid drawdown. So if you lower your reservoir too quickly, you can cause the upstream slope to fail. These are just a few of the different failure modes for embankment dams, and this is showing some of the failure modes for concrete and masonry dams. This is where you can get open joints in the foundations, and where your foundations aren't deep enough or there's too much uplift pressure, you may get a failure of a concrete dam. And then, of course, there's the topic of my conversation later on this evening, is spillway failures. So with spillways, if they're not big enough, if the capacity isn't large enough to take a flood, it may overtop, and if it's close to the dam, this will cause erosion of the dam. So I won't talk much more about that, as we have that to talk about later on. Sorry, a very big table here. I'm not expecting you to take all of this in, but this is just a few of the dam failures around the world that have caused deaths and quite devastating destruction downstream when they failed. There's a couple here that I'm going to talk about. You'll note Malpass A, there was 421 people were killed, and Veont in Italy, where a really horrendous catastrophe killed 2,600 people. So when a dam fails, it really is quite devastating. This is a picture of Malpass A in France. As I said, this one killed 421 people when it failed. And the causes for this one was a result of, this is a concrete dam, and the uplift pressures were very high during heavy rainfall, and there was a weakness in the left abutment of in the rock. And what the lessons learnt, the key lessons from this one, is that it's absolutely essential for when you're doing dam design to undertake really thorough site investigation and to have experts from various disciplines working on the designs. So you need all types of disciplines working on designs: geotechnical, hydraulic, hydrologists. It's one dam engineer is not an expert in all things, so it's really important to ensure that everyone inputs from their specialist background. Another very catastrophic failure, as I said, was Veont Dam. This, you can see the dam just down here. This is the dam in the valley. It's a very, very narrow valley. It's a nearly 300 metre high concrete dam. And this one failed when the hillside on this side here, you can see where it's got a smooth slope. The whole of that hillside collapsed into the reservoir and displaced the reservoir, causing a 125 metre wave to come over the top of the dam. And the dam didn't fail, as you can see, it still stands there today, but the reservoir overtopped and was funneled down a very narrow valley into some villages below, and absolutely devastating and demolishing many of the houses. And lessons learnt from this one, although there was lots of instrumentation and surveillance on this dam, it was noted that this was a very deep-seated slip, and that the poor water pressures and the movements needed to be measured at depth as well as on the surface. And here's a few of the dam failures in the UK. These ones are, there's a variety here that one that you may have heard in particular was Dike there in the centre. This has just recently had its 50th year anniversary, and was probably the worst disaster we had in the UK, where 244 people were killed. And you can see the last ones where we actually had a dam failure that caused a loss of life was back in 1925. This is Dike. It was an earth embankment dam, and the causes for this one was, it was never absolutely confirmed, but the theory and the most likely cause was hydraulic fracture of the core. And it was a very thin core with non-cohesive material on the shoulders adjacent to the core. So the lessons learnt from this was to ensure that you had a wide enough core with well compacted fill on either side of the core. And another concern was the fact that there were tunnels through the dam and pipes through the dam. So lessons learnt from this was to, where feasible, to place pipes in tunnels through the natural ground. So as a result of these disasters, when things go wrong, obviously we learn the lessons, and the important thing is then to ensure that we improve our designs and our understanding, and that we ensure that these are fed into future dam designs. So as a result of Dike, this is where specifications became common practice for fill to be worked in layers and compacted in thinner layers of, well, it was 9 inches, the 23.23 metres. And this is where tunnels were starting to be driven through natural ground. And the other lesson learnt there is when you have a pressurised pipe through a dam, it's best practice to install an upstream valve. So you can actually close the valve upstream of the dam and have a non-pressurised pipe through the dam. So if it did burst, there would be, it would not cause erosion of the dam. Other incidents continued though through the 1870s, and there were lots of instances where dams started leaking in the foundations as well as through the dam. And this is where common practice started to have cut-off trenches below dams. And also they started to grout the foundations to seal any of the joints in the foundations. And also this is where the dams started to they started to install drainage into the dams to collect the seepage and take it safely away from the dam, and to reduce uplift pressures. So this is the last dam failure that caused some deaths. These are 2 dams that are located in North Wales. Igau is a concrete dam, which there was a foundation failure, and it was found that the foundation wasn't deep enough, and its foundations burst, and the reservoir cascaded into the Curtie Dam, which was just downstream. Curtie is an earth embankment with a concrete wall, and as you can see there from the fill, it's pretty loose material. And when the Igau reservoir filled into Curtie, it overtopped and eroded the downstream shoulder, and the dam collapsed. And that then flooded downstream into the town of Dolgarrog. And you can see there the devastation that it's caused just downstream. So after those disasters in the 1930s, 1930, the Reservoirs Act was the first piece of legislation that was passed to actually improve dam safety in the UK. And that legislation required that there had to be an inspection by a qualified engineer, and that became mandatory. And that was as far as it went in the 1930s. From there onwards, there was still continued to be near misses, and there was some major slips on 3 dams in the 1937s. in 1937, and a lot of that was due to the fact that there was improved plant and equipment that was enabling the construction to be, so the dams were raised much faster, and that had the result of increasing pore pressures, and thereby you had the instability and the slips in dams. So as the time went on, soil mechanics became more widely used in designs, and they used berms to ensure that the dams were more stable, and there was wider use of drainage blankets and instrumentation to ensure that they could monitor the pore pressures in dams. However, even though there's been no loss of life in the UK since 1925, as I said, there have still been many near misses and dams have still failed. The average age of dams is now 115 years and growing. And there's always the question of how much longer can these dams actually continue. Certainly with the extremes of weather and the dams aging every year, the question is how much longer will they continue. And this is just a picture here of Warm Withens in the 1970s, which failed. And this one was, as a result, it had been perfectly stable and fine for over 100 years. And then a tunnel was installed within the dam, which changed the whole behaviour of the dam. And there was leakage along the line of the tunnel, and that eventually burst, as you can see there. So the lesson learnt from this one is that when you are working on existing dams, it's really important to fully understand how you can change the stresses and strains within a dam by undertaking any remedial works. As a result of Warm Withens and other incidents, in 1975, the Reservoirs Act was passed, and that was applicable to England and Wales, and various publications about how to manage dams during floods and other guides were published to assist with improving dam safety. And the 1975 Act was actually implemented in '86 following another dam failure, Carsington Dam, and that actually brought in new roles for enforcement and supervision, and the undertakers also had a role to play. So this is when you had panel engineers who were inspecting the reservoirs twice a year, and all reservoir panel engineers who inspected reservoirs every 10 years as a minimum. And if this wasn't undertaken, the important thing was that there was enforcement action to ensure this happened. And there were other publications, as I said. So this is a fairly recent near miss. You may have heard in the north of England, Ulley Dam, an earth embankment dam. This was a spillway failure in 2007. You can see there the spillway just there is a very, very narrow spillway, stepped masonry block spillway. And what happened was this spillway was actually lower than a more modern, wider spillway. And that one came into action first when the floods came in, and it came into flow, and it was overwhelmed, and there was some turbulence within the channel, which plucked out the masonry stones, and the walls collapsed. And the dam, which you can see there, it's right adjacent to the dam, so that is actually the dam that has started to erode. And what would have happened if action hadn't been taken, is that would have eroded backwards until the dam actually failed. Now this one was widely publicised in the news because just downstream of this dam there was a motorway. There was also a very large gas pipe, and a lot of residential areas. And so the residents were evacuated. The area was put onto a no-fly zone because if the dam had failed and the gas pipe had blown, it could have potentially taken out any aircraft in the area. And the motorway was closed. So it had a significant impact. They did manage to stem the erosion by they got excavators and fill and managed to plug up that hole whilst pumping out the water, and they managed to get the reservoir down enough to prevent that from failing. So it was a fortunate and successful incident management, but could have been very catastrophic if they hadn't been able to catch that in time. So after Ollie wasn't the only one. There was also a near miss at Malpass Dam where the spillway there failed. So following these incidents and flooding generally across the UK, there was the pit report, which brought in recommended new legislation, and that's when the 2010 Floods and Water Management Act was passed. And there was a section on this on reservoirs, and this has brought in new risk-based guidance and other recommendations. One in particular is to regulate smaller reservoirs, which has recently been implemented in Wales. So for the next couple of next part of my my lecture, I'd just like to talk about two incidents. As I said, this is an incident in Wales when I was with Washwater as the dam safety manager, and Washwater has kindly given me permission to show you this and this incident and how they were managed. So this is a dam, an earth embankment dam in South Wales, where it was over the winter of 2012-2013, and there was consistent, continuous flooding. No big extreme storms, but there was lots of continuous small flood events coming through, and this reservoir had been on flow for 3 or 4 months continuously, and there was water everywhere. There was water under all around. The whole of the embankment was very saturated. And then it was early January when the better weather came in and the reservoir came off flow. And as it came off flow, our reservoir keeper went up on his normal routine inspection, and this is what he saw. I was in a meeting at the time and my phone started ringing, and I kept turning it off and it kept ringing, and I thought, okay, I need to take this one. And when I took the call, my engineer said, I think you need to take a look at the photographs that I've just sent you. And this is what he showed me. As soon as I saw these photographs, we kicked into action. So this shows that the spillway is in two forms. It was originally a brick-faced spillway, as you can see there on your right. Your left. But the bottom half had been replaced with concrete slabs. And what had happened is, during the high velocities while it was overflowing, and unknown to the reservoir keeper, because it's very hard to see when you've got high turbulent water going over a spillway, these bricks had been plucked out. And you can see where the water has gone underneath the spillway and has started eroding underneath the spillway. And this erosion had worked its way down and underneath the slabs at the bottom half. And as the reservoir came off flow, as the spillway came off flow, the huge hydraulic pressures underneath the slab, where all this water was pressing up against the slabs, as the water came off, the slabs blew upwards, and you can see there, these are 6-ton slabs, reinforced slabs, and the reinforcement was completely bent and broken in two, as you can see there. And it is quite frightening, really, what the power of water can do. until you see something like this, it's hard to actually believe it. Now the issue is we're in the middle of winter, and if that reservoir overflows again, we could start losing more of the spillway to the point where it unravels and then starts actually eroding the dam, which you can see is right adjacent to the dam again. So we immediately started work on repairing the spillway. But as you can see, as always is in these situations, we're in quite high altitudes, and we had extremely difficult weather conditions. And this was now sort of the end of January, and we had an unprecedented amount of snow. And what we did was, I don't know if you have the same setup here in Ireland, but we have a system called bronze, silver and gold. So depending on the level of the incident, bronze is a local event, silver is a regional event, and gold is your highest level event. So we declared a gold incident, and we had our highest level people in our gold command, in our room in Cardiff, away from the site. It's very important to have people in a nice dry room with being able to make decisions away from the site, not affected by the pressures of the site. So I was sat in gold command for 6 weeks while this was going on, and we were continuously watching the weather forecast and planning for the worst. So this was them working away. They had to install concrete in this weather, so we had blankets and hot air blowers and everything going, and quickset concrete to try to enable us to make these repairs. But it was slow going. We were working 24/7. We had high volume pumps. These pumps were the biggest pumps you can find in the UK. They're the ones that the emergency services have, and we managed to find 4 in the whole of the country, and we got these to site, and these were going full bore all the time, trying to keep the reservoir down. But it's also, as I said, if you remember, I said earlier about you have to manage your reservoir level so it doesn't drop too quickly to cause an upstream failure. So we had people monitoring the dam while we drew the reservoir down. Our aim was to get it as empty as we could while all these works were going on, to provide the flood storage in case another storm came in. And you can see there, one of my technicians there operating one of the valves in pretty difficult conditions. So while we were undertaking these repairs, as I said, we had lots of contingency measures going on. On one side of the reservoir, we were digging a channel. So on the worst case scenario that the reservoir overtopped again, the plan was to dig a notch out of the side of the reservoir and allow water to go down away from the dam, so it didn't erode any of the dam. And so we had the excavator on standby ready to take that notch out if that was necessary. We had CCTV camera patched into Gold Command, and that's where all the decisions were being made, whilst we were continuously having, we had briefings every 2 or 3 hours, depending on what was going on site, to make sure that we all had the same information. And while this was all going on, it was probably, in fact I can see it there, yes, it was on the 25th of January, they forecasted a very large storm coming in. At that point, we had half of the spillway completed, and the other half was just blinded with concrete. So we weren't quite ready for the storm. We actually forecast that the reservoir would fill in. Our model was showing 12 hours, but where we slightly underestimated was the amount of snow thaw. There was actually much more snow thawing than snow in the hills than we actually accounted for. So the reservoir actually filled within 8 hours. You can see there in the middle, that line there, it shows how quickly it rose. And our all reservoir panel engineer that was on site at the time, he said that he's seen many, many incidents and been to many difficult situations, but he said that was probably one of the scariest moments of his life, was seeing how quickly that reservoir actually filled. And he said you could actually see it coming up, and it was swirling around, and there was lots of turbulence, and he knew as soon as that water came over the spillway, there was going to be some hairy moments. So, as always happens, it happened at 4 o'clock in the morning in dreadful weather conditions, but we had got all the contingencies in place. We'd stockpiled sandbags in case there had been any erosion and overtopping, where we'd have placed the sandbags in the eroded holes. There was staff and excavators at the ready to take out the notch that I mentioned, to hopefully take the flow of water away from the dam. We'd notified the local resilience forums and had evacuation plans in place. At this point we hadn't evacuated, but we had everything ready to go, and we could have evacuated very quickly. And while all that was happening, we just had to watch and wait and monitored the spillway to see what happened. And fortunately, and thanks to some very good planning, the repairs held. So this was the before and after shots. And currently, that's the dam that was repaired temporarily. Currently, they are just undertaking the full upgrade of that spillway. So that was a successful story, and a lot of lessons learned. And I just wanted to, as it's quite topical, compare this to the Oroville Dam spillway failure. Now, you may have seen this. There's lots of videos and photos going around on the internet, and I've managed to download some of the photographs. The owner, the Californian Water Resources, have been very open and shared a lot of information online. And just to mention, I have taken a lot of this off the internet. So this isn't my own personal knowledge, but I just wanted to show you the scenario that can happen at a very high dam. So this dam is 235 metres tall. It's just located north of Sacramento in the United States. You can see there the spillway, the main spillway in the middle. Well, actually, I say that this is the dam here. So you actually have an area of land here which is away from the dam. So the main dam is over here on the right side of the dam, and this line here is what they call the auxiliary spillway, or as they call it, the emergency spillway, which is leveled just slightly higher than the main spillway. So this one comes into play after the main spillway. So early January this year, a series of storms, again very similar to Rumney Bridge in that it was just ongoing bombardment of storms coming through, lots of runoff, and the reservoir filled to the point where they needed to open the spillway gates. You can still see the spillway gates there at the top. So they opened the gates and let the flow through the spillway. And the flows increased, and one of the inspectors went up and saw some of the damage, and so they closed the gates, and this is what they saw when they closed the gates. And I think that probably tells the story in itself. You can see the people there. It gives you the scale of the hole there that's eroded. The interesting thing to note while I'm on this, I'll come to the theories of why it actually happened later, but if you just note there that the original failure is along the line of a joint of the concretes and the big void underneath the spillway. You can see there, the side of the hill is actually starting to erode. You can see the wall just literally balancing over the big void there at the moment, as it is. So, unfortunately, the runoff continued, and the storms didn't let up, and the reservoir continued to fill. So it got to the point where the emergency spillway started overflowing. Now, the emergency spillway, this part here, is just a 10-metre high concrete lip, and everything downstream of that is just natural ground. And what happened is, as the flows came over, the hillside started eroding. If you just note the road down here, just downstream of the spillway, you can see there it's starting to erode. So note that's that road again, and this is what happened. So it basically took out the road and is eroding a seriously big hole on that side. Now, the main concern about this is that with the backward erosion, if it had continued, the 10-metre high concrete lip would have eventually undermined and collapsed, and that would have been like a dam failure on its own. Even without the dam failing, that 10-metre high wall of water over that area of reservoir rushing down the valley would have probably caused one of the most the worst disaster in the United States, worse than any of the dam failures that they've experienced before. So they had to open the main spillway again. So even though we have a main spillway out of action or seriously damaged, they had no choice but to bring that back into flow. And while that was flowing, they got their crews in and started repairing the auxiliary spillway. And this is them pumping in concrete and placing rocks. So whilst that is happening, this is what's going on with the main spillway. And you can see there that obviously there's going to be more erosion, more turbulence in the area where that hole was. And you can see it starting to erode quite severely on the hillside. And then also you can see the spoil heap at the bottom where all the debris is being washed. So eventually the reservoir lowered significantly enough that they were able to close the spillway gates again and get in there to do an assessment of the damage. And this is what they see. So now they've got even more significant damage. You can see there the walls with the reinforcement twisted. It just shows you the power, as I said, the power of water. And there's the damage to the whole of the hillside on the other side. And the hole obviously has got rather much larger. This is the debris field at the bottom. You can see there it started to completely fill up the river channel at the base. So then, late February, they started working on clearing that debris field. One of the main aims was they wanted to clear that enough that they could actually bring the hydroelectric plant back online, because that in itself would then draw off some of the water from the reservoir. And they worked through the night. You can see the pictures there, the base. So currently, what I forgot to mention is, when the auxiliary spillway did start eroding, they evacuated nearly 200,000 people from downstream. But now that they've done some of their repairs on that side of the hill, they've allowed the people to return to their houses, and they're continuing to clear out the debris from the river channel. They've managed to bring back online the hydroelectric plant, and that is assisting with keeping the reservoir level down. So while they're now hopefully out of the stormy season, although that's not for certain, they are continuing to do an awful lot of repair work, and they need to have all the repairs completed now before the next rainy season. So they've got an awful lot of work ahead of them. That was reported on the internet that they estimated about $200 million has been spent already, but that's just a drop in the ocean of what they've got to do still. So it does show you how how costly these incidents can be. The theories that are being discussed online about why the dam failed, as I said, these are early days. The investigations haven't been completed, and this isn't a fact, but there's people talking about the fact it was caused by cavitation. This can happen when you have defects in a spillway, and the water becomes turbulent and causes air bubbles, and as they collapse, they can have an extremely powerful force which break open the concrete. Another theory is about uplift pressures. I mentioned in Rumney Bridge 2 that was the main cause of the Rumney failure, is where you've got a significant amount of hydrostatic pressure underneath your slab, and that can force up the slabs and break the slabs in that manner. And then another potential cause is internal erosion. You recall I showed you where the line of the failure was along a joint of one of the concrete slabs. So if you lose the sealant between the slabs, water can go down in between the slabs and can start eroding the soil underneath the spillway. And then your slabs may collapse due to the voids underneath the spillway. But to be honest, sometimes it's very difficult to say exactly what does happen, and quite often it is usually a combination of a number of different factors. So lessons learned with regards to spillways is that ongoing timely maintenance and monitoring of spillway channels is absolutely essential, as it is for the dams in general. But the most important thing is when you see defects, as in joint sealant is missing or bricks and masonry have been plucked out, is to replace it as soon as reasonably possible. And absolutely as essential as well is to ensure the maintenance of your underdrains and ensure that your pressure relief drainage is functioning. So ensure that they're not overwhelmed, they're kept clear, and that they're flowing properly. Quite often we say to people, like we say to the reservoir keepers, that if they see an increase in flow in the drains, they should raise the alarm. But also, equally as important is if they see no flow, that when you have a normal flow, if you see no flow, that's a sign that you may have blocked drains. So it's absolutely vital that those are cleared. And other ways, if you're concerned about leakage or voids under your spillways, there are techniques, non-destructive techniques that you can do to check for voids under your spillway and to check for leakage. I'd just like to thank Washwater very much for allowing me to show the slides on the Rumney Bridge incident and just acknowledge their excellent management of that incident. And I'll leave you with some sunny day photographs again.
Super, thanks Tracy. If anybody has any questions, there's a microphone here. You need to speak into the microphone so the people on listening on the webcast can actually hear you. And just give your name in advance, please. Would have to be the first guy.
Thank you. Hi Tracy, my name is Owen Forrestall. Just in relation to the Oroville Dam, Was there a design issue with the auxiliary spillway? Because there seems to be an access road along the front, and when they opened it, because of issues with the initial spillway, then that seems to cause more problems and had to revert back. Was there, like, did that spillway operate as it should have?
So, from what I've read, I believe the spillway was operated as it should have done. I think the concern was always that there was always the concern that on the auxiliary spillway there could be erosion, because there was no erosion protection immediately below that 10-metre high concrete lip. So yeah, potentially you could say that, you know, that was something that was missed, but they did operate the spillway, from what I gather, as they potentially should have. They just hadn't. I don't think they'd anticipated the amount of force and erosion that could happen on that auxiliary spillway.
Thank you.
Hi Tracy, thanks very much for the presentation. Just in relation to the dam safety incident that you were managing in Wales, I was just wondering what was the threshold for making a decision whether to put the notch on the auxiliary spillway?
So, it was going to be. It was very much when you're doing an incident, you can plan as much as you can. You know, you can play out scenarios. We went through quite a lot of what-if scenarios. When should we do things? But a lot of it has to be considered, and decisions have to be made as things are transpiring. So we didn't say, for example, at this level we're going to do this, or when we see this we're going to do that. It was more, we had, as I said, we had an all-reservoir panel engineer on site, and he was very much going to advise us as to when we did have one system. We had a 1 to 10 system, and our director, who was in charge in Gold Command, would say to the engineer, where are you on the scale of 1 to 10 as to how worried you are? And most of the time he was down at the 2s and 3s. I think potentially if he got up to 5 or 6, I think our director would have made the decision to evacuate, to do the notch, because the notch was not something we wanted to do, because it would have been uncontrolled. It wasn't a lined channel. It was just a very rudimentary channel that we put on the other side. So yeah, we had to. It's very difficult to say when and what we would have done, but it was based on advice from the panel engineer and the amount of risk, I believe, that the director was prepared to take.
Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm just wondering, is there any alternative designs for the spillways? They seem to be either bricks or just kind of concrete cast. Is there any sort of layering you can put on to reduce turbulence?
Mostly, engineers will prefer concrete, because that is quite a smooth finish, if you can get a smooth finish on it and you maintain it. So there's different forms of concrete you can use, and people have talked about using geotextiles, plastic kind of materials as well. But generally, as long as a concrete is maintained well, and the spillway design itself is designed in such a way to reduce the turbulence and the pressures on the channel, then that is the preferred form of spillway. Using masonry is not the preferred material because of its roughness and how blocks can be plucked out. But you can do a lot of modelling and CFD type modelling, computational fluid dynamics, and that can show where your pressures are. And that's why another way of doing ensuring that your turbulence is reduced is through physical modelling. So quite often a dam owner will use both techniques. They'll use CFD and physical modelling and ensure that the designs are reducing that turbulence and the pressures. And then concrete is really the preferred material.
Hi, Josh Riley, working with Arup. Thanks very much, Tracy. That was really interesting. I had two questions, really. I'm working in the maritime engineering, so we deal a lot with climate change, sea level rise, increased storminess. So I'm wondering, how is that incorporated into dam design nowadays? And also, what about older dams, and how is it possible in any way to adapt them for the effects of climate change? Are we likely to see more failures due to climate change effects as well?
Okay, so first of all, how we incorporate climate change into dam design. You're already designing dams for what we call the probable maximum flood, 1 in 10,000 year floods. At that type of those sorts of floods, your uncertainties, your probabilities are kind of a little bit off. They're not certain. Nothing is certain. So to add in potential climate change at those sort of probabilities, it's very difficult. So because we are designing for such extreme events, climate change isn't specifically included. But your question on how is it going to affect existing dams, is exactly the question that I asked myself. Certainly as the dam safety manager at Washwater, within just the 5 years that I was there, the number of events that were reported increased in just 5 years. Now, you could argue, was that potentially that we had better trained operatives and we'd put in place better surveillance, so it was reporting more. But I think I definitely saw, as the years went through, that there were more and more leaks being reported, more cracks, more minor events. But we would have in the order of 12 to 15 calls, concerns. I'd get one, probably at least 1 or 2 a month, where I was, we were discussing the what ifs and what might happen. And they were kind of early signs of defects, but the good thing was we were catching them early. If we hadn't had that surveillance in place, potentially, that could have led to something worse. So this is just a personal opinion. I think that potentially, yes, we may have more and more incidents because of ageing assets, and particularly where maintenance and investment is limited.
Any more? No?
Tracy, Daniel Rafter from RPS. Just early on in your presentation, you were talking about the average age of dams in the UK being 115 years. And looking at the dates of some of the early failures you had where people unfortunately lost their lives, it kind of occurred to me there were somewhere between 1 and 5 years within the life of the dam when the failure occurred. And given that, as you say, the majority of the dams are over 100 years in the UK, and the failures that you've been discussing are primarily to do with slipways and not the kind of embankment or the dam wall itself, how great is the risk that an actual dam failure will occur, and probably would the focus for dam engineers be on design, better design or maintenance or whatever of the slipway itself, and as opposed to the embankment of the dam?
So a couple questions there that I'll answer. First of all, so I only showed very few dam failures. Spillway failures are just a very small portion, actually. The majority of the failures are actually to do with the dam, where you get internal erosion and leakage through the dam. There's a third in the UK. I'm not sure of the proportion in the world, in the World Dam Failures table, but there's certainly significant a number of incidents and failures caused through the dam, where dams fail, like concrete dams actually overturn, slip, just collapse. There is a statistic in one of the publications from the International Commission of Large Dams that actually states that there was 1% of dams failed, which sounds quite shocking. That's like 1 in 100 dams were failing. But in the earlier part of the 1900s, there was, it did actually then go on to say that this has improved 4 times. So I presume they're talking about, on average, 1 in 400 dams are now failing. That still sounds extremely high and unacceptable, really. But I think, again, that report was I think the report was about 30 years old. So I think since then things have improved. And I genuinely believe that the main reason that dam safety has improved, and I've always said, is the first and most important part to improve dam safety is to improve your surveillance and your monitoring. So I think with increased awareness and understanding of the importance of surveillance and monitoring has decreased the amount of failures. Did that answer all your questions? Okay.
Okay, no more. Thanks, Tracy. Thanks, Tracy. That was great. On behalf of I've just asked Michael Goss from Engineers Ireland Civil Division to give the vote of thanks on behalf of CIWAM and Engineers Ireland, please.
Thank you. So on behalf of the Civil Division, firstly, I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank CIWAM and the Republic of Ireland branch for organising the event, the audience for their participation. It gives me great pleasure to extend a vote of thanks to the speaker. The presentation material was fantastic. I loved the use of the photographs. It was brilliant in terms of giving scale and perspective. The delivery of the presentation was also a very high standard, and bringing us through that incident in Wales was very insightful. I was fascinated by the goal command. I wonder, does Donald Trump have a goal command? It sounds like he should be sitting in one. Again, I'd just like to thank you, and can I ask the audience to extend their appreciation in the usual manner. Thank you very much.